Today on The State of Us, is the economy doing well? Americans don't believe it. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by the friendly redneck liberal and senior resident historian here at True Chat, an educator of more than 35 years. His name, you know him, he's Mr. Lance L. Jackson. And today we're looking at what greater thing than there could be, the American economy, and particularly inflation. Americans are having an inflation aha moment. Many people knew inflation was here, but now they say they can feel it at the gas pump, the local coffee shop, and the grocery store, according to a personal finance article in the Wall Street Journal. And we've got another article that talks to us about why this economic boom can't lift America's spirits. Discontent is widespread in spite of job growth, wage gains, and strong asset values. At the root of it, inflation and shortages. Before we dive into that, though, Lance, do we have a word of the day?
We do. And it's actually two words of the day. Actually, it's two spellings of the same word.
Oh, my goodness.
It's rigmarole. R-I-G-M-A-R-O-L-E. 3 syllables. I knew it as rigmarole. R-I-G-A-M-A-R-O-L-E. But that rigmarole with the A in it is actually the alternate spelling of rigmarole. So I guess all the in the know people say rigmarole and all of us hillbillies say rigmarole. But what does it mean? Well, it has two meanings: a foolish or incoherent rambling talk or nonsense. And second, a foolishly involved, fussy, or time-wasting procedure. So you could take it either way today. Is this foolish, incoherent, rambling talk about something called inflation? Or is it a foolishly involved, fussy, or time-wasting procedure to talk about it? Since, as we've done earlier this year, that money doesn't really matter. So, but it seems to matter to people, right? As we read this, people are upset. People are wondering if the world's going to come to an end, especially those of you under the age of 40 who have never seen inflation like this before. And as the article points out, the people under 40 aren't the only ones who are concerned, but they are the most concerned because it's like, oh my gosh, this has never happened before. And the author is quick to point out, well, yeah, it did back in the 1980s. But if you're under 40,
in those good old days,
you haven't seen it before, I guess as somebody who saw it in the 80s and lived through it, and I do remember, my parents bought a car because they needed one. I mean, absolutely everything was broken down. They had to, and they bought the cheapest new car they could find and still had to pay like 15% interest on the car loan. So I know from which I speak, and so it does have a wondering effect on people.
Well, as the article tells us, Lance, plenty are having that experience while filling their gas tanks, opening a utility bill, or looking for a place to live. The national average price for gasoline recently climbed above $4 per gallon, hitting its highest point since July 2008. Electricity bills climbed more than 4% in 2021 and are up again this year, sparking complaints.
Wait a minute, July 2008 was Joe Biden president then? Because I'm seeing those same stickers as you, and it's Biden's fault that gas is $4 a gallon.
That's right. Yes,
yeah.
It's all his fault.
Who was president in the summer of 2008?
I believe that would be
that would be George Bush.
George W. Average cost of a one-bedroom apartment is up nearly 25% year over year. And home lending costs are also rising. The average rate for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage topped 4% for the first time since May of 2019, Freddie Mac said Thursday.
And in 1975, my parents' loan was 7.5%. Almost twice of what it is now, and everybody's going, oh my gosh, it's so bad. No, it's just because you had cheap money for so long.
So I would mention, Lance, that while today's inflation hasn't hit double digits as it did in 1974-75 and in 1979 through 81 with a peak of 14.6%, so almost double what we're talking right now, it is in some other respects more corrosive. It is accompanied and in part caused by shortages of goods such as computers, cars, and even soup and cereal. A July Gallup poll found that 7 in 10 Americans have been unable to get a product or had faced delays in getting one. And I think this is part of that key, because we said, okay, well, discontent is widespread in spite of job growth, wage gains, and strong asset values. Well, why is that? Yes, inflation, but inflation, what is causing inflation? This goes to that root issue of things, right? Well, a huge thing that's driving inflation right now is lack of access to goods and a labor shortage, right? So people can't, which by the way, those things are also interconnected. So people can't get things they want, and the things that are available are getting priced higher because of the increased demand, right? So capitalism is underway, working at its finest, Lance. And everybody's upset that capitalism is doing as capitalism does, which is responding to demand and short supply. So that's the other thing I'd just like to point out. And I'm not, if you've listened to the show long enough, you'd know that I've argued in favor of capitalism several times. But for all those people that are, yipping and yapping and yawing about whose fault this is, whether you think that, Trump set us up for this and this is just the after effect, or whether or not you think it's Biden's fault. As we have said many times, the president gets, regardless of who the president is, too much credit and too much blame for the economy. The economy will do as the economy does, and the Fed will do as it does, and it may or may not have a very substantive effect on Americans' sentiment, which arguably might be the single most important and driving factor.
Well, and you mentioned, and I agree with you totally. And you mentioned unemployment rate; it's at 4%, right? I mean, and we've talked about that. That the problem is not that there aren't any jobs, that there aren't enough people looking for jobs or willing to fill the jobs that are available. Now, we've also talked about how people are quitting jobs because they don't get the hours that they want, that they actually want to work more hours, but because of the hard-pressed managers finding enough workers, they continue to hire workers and don't give the workers they have enough hours, so those workers quit to look for other jobs. So there's, again, a lot of different pieces that go into this, but typically when you look at a 4% unemployment rate, you're thinking, well, that's a pretty good economy. Things are going pretty well. People are working. People have a job. And we know that salaries have gone up. Most people have seen a raise in pay. You can go by most stores and see where they are offering employment for much higher than the minimum wage, which, we have argued for years is too low. And then you have those on the other side of capitalism who say, well, if you're going to raise wages, then you are going to have inflation, because that's going to raise the cost of doing business. And so therefore the prices are passed on to the consumer. So there's plenty here for everybody, or it's all just a bunch of rigmarole. I have a whole lot more than my parents did. I won't say I'm living any better, because I didn't know I was poor back then. I was just having fun. I was playing ball, running barefoot, riding my bike, and having a whale of a time. Didn't know I didn't have anything, so I don't know which is worse. Just having fun and living life and enjoying the moment, or worrying about where my next $1,000 is coming from.
Is that a rhetorical question, or do you want the audience to answer it?
Yeah, both.
Both. In your case, it's a rhetorical question.
It's rhetorical to me, but
it might not be to other people.
How do other people feel about that?
Correct.
Is this really it? And again, it's like, oh my gosh, it's going to be horrible like this forever. Well, again, being the historian, right? And you talking about capitalism, if you look, this goes on for months, a couple of years, and then what happens? Something else happens in the world and things turn around. So it's not Is it making it rough for people? Is it making it, I said here on the show a couple of weeks ago, took $100 to fill up my gas tank in my truck.
Well, we maybe should have started with this to avoid any unnecessary rigmarole with our audience. But what is inflation? It's actually pretty straightforward. In economic terms, it's a general increase in prices and a fall in the purchasing value of money. So the things that I want are increasing. My ability to get them via my purchasing power is decreasing. And therefore, thereby making things more expensive, right? Because if my purchasing value of the money was going up simultaneously with the prices proportionally, then it really wouldn't be relevant.
It just means you can't buy as much stuff with the same amount of money as you used to.
I want people to think about this. The article explains that this is why consumers say they feel as bad as they did in the financial crisis year of 2009, according to a recent Gallup poll. They feel as bad as they did during the year 2009. Why is that? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. Consumer sentiment about the economy is not in a great place, Lance. It's just not doing great. And the thing that comes to mind here is, well, why is that? Well, one thing is politics. Voters' confidence in the government's economic policies recently fell to the lowest in nearly 8 years, according to the University of Michigan's poll. Since the early 2000s, people's political preferences have tended to influence their view of the economy more than before the year 2000, according to Gallup findings. The gap between Democrats and Republicans' view of the economy widened during the Donald Trump presidency, according to University of Michigan data. During the first year of the pandemic, Mr. Trump's last year in office, feelings about the economy fell sharply among both Democrats and Republicans, according to Gallup. After the Democratic Mr. Biden won, Republicans' view on the economy dived again, while Democrats' views picked up, according to Gallup's data. Still, the slide in confidence crosses party lines. Miss Arthur, the jewelry designer in Mississippi, is a lifelong Democrat who voted for Mr. Biden, but said she has lost confidence in him because of inflation. She said she considers him out of touch with the troubles that the pandemic and inflation have dealt to ordinary people and is open to voting Republican in the midterms. Quote, "The economy looks like we're going to be at a standstill for a while," Miss Arthur said. So whether or not Biden or Trump or whoever is to blame, Americans are going to assign the blame to the person in charge or who they think's in charge.
And that's historically what happens. It just is. People vote with their pocketbook. If things are good, you overlook all the horrible things that the government's doing because, hey, I'm living better. So things, have to change. And if I'm struggling economically, well, I don't care what that person in the White House is doing or in Congress is doing. We need to change because I'm struggling. And I think the other part of this, along with the political outcome, is the psychology of it. For so long, I never, and again, I've only been alive 60 years. I'm not 120 or 300 years old and can speak to the times in the past other than from historical study content. But I've never seen money so cheap. I can't tell you, my last 3 cars were bought at either 0, 1, or 2% interest. I bought my home and have refinanced it twice at half the interest rate that my parents had to pay on their one and only home in the 70s. And I've been able to finance it and refinance it twice for half of what they had to. So my adult life since the 80s, right? When I got married in 1982 at the height of this recession that we're referring to 40 years ago, I've never seen money as cheap as it's been for the last 15, 20 years. And I think that psychology is what's affecting people. This inflation is hitting people so hard because it's been so long since we've experienced it, or for all of those people, which make up a large number of the population under the age of 40, they've never seen anything like this. And so they're panicking. And I really don't think it's as bad. Is it bad? Is it hurting people? Is it rough? Sure it is. But I think part of it is the psychology that we've just had it so good for so long. We didn't realize, to your point, that this is what capitalism does occasionally. It expands and contracts. And we're just in one of those phases.
So at the end of the last segment, Lance, I shared that the article explains, right, that consumers say they feel as bad as they did in the financial crisis year of 2009. However, that goes on to say that for the first time, because we're big on, there's not a lot of firsts, right? For the first time, Americans who say they are, quote, not too happy outnumber those who say they're very happy. And that's according to the most recent survey from the nonprofit group NORC at the University of Chicago. So that's your pessimism, optimism for the first time. For the first time.
Well, I mean, I'm not happy that prices are up. I'm not happy that there's inflation. I'm a retired person
and you drive a truck.
And I drive a truck who still goes to work, and my wife is contemplating retirement. But she's also saying that it's retirement from this job and that she's been doing for 32 years. And but she wants to go get another job. We're not quitting to work, but it is disconcerting. I would not put myself in the camp of, I'm very happy with the economy right now. But I guess what I'm saying is I'm very laissez-faire in that I understand it. I know that this had to take place at some time. Things had been too good for too long. You're not supposed to get double-digit returns on your stock prices. You're not supposed to get double-digit returns on your investments. That's not supposed to happen. All right. That's not sustainable. Okay. But it's been going on for so long that people with their short memories that we have think, well, that's the way it's going to always be. And to your point, that's not capitalism.
Capitalism is defined as an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state.
See, you just said right there, that's why you shouldn't give credit or blame the current leader.
Oh, because it says that are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state.
Exactly.
Okay. So we don't really have capitalism, just to be clear.
Well, you and I know that, but most people would say that, yes, we do. And we say, and okay, now explain why we don't have true capitalism. We have more capitalism than most countries have. If I would say probably all countries, but I don't have the references to back that up. But why don't we have true capitalism? Just like there's no true communism, there's no really true social. Well, I guess everybody has some form of socialism because there is some government control, right?
Oh, we don't have socialism. This is the United States, Lance. There's no socialism here.
Well,
there's no socialism.
Does the government pay people not to plant crops on certain parts of their land? Or not to raise certain animals?
That's special. That's or welfare or Medicaid or Medicare or
wait a minute. Social Security.
Social Security. Those are all exceptions, right? Those aren't socialism.
Oh, I see.
No, those aren't socialism. No.
Oh.
No.
I thought by definition they were.
Well, socialism, by definition, is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates the means of production, distribution, and exchange, which should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole.
So when the supply chain is bad, we all say, well, the president needs to do something about that. Oh, that's socialism.
Right.
The president needs to open up the docks to get those ships in, and then the president needs to do this and that. Congress needs to do this and that. Well, that's socialism. If you're having them worry about the economy and you say, well, yeah, that's the way it's always been. No, it wasn't. You go back and you study the early 19th century, there were all kinds of boom and busts because the government was not involved in the economy. But after the Great Depression from 1929 to 1945, we didn't want the economy to go through these ups and downs. And so we began to turn to the government and say, we want you to try to control things just enough that we can still have private ownership of business and make all the money we want, but protect us from these horrible things called depressions.
You know, when you talk to young people, there's a lot of sentiment for the notion that maybe capitalism is not what our country wants. I did look up, by the way, I looked for...
Well, we don't have it.
Right.
So we
don't have pure capitalism.
We don't want it because we haven't had it since World War II.
Because what we're experiencing right now is capitalism, right?
Well, we're experiencing
with the government attempting to rein it in.
Exactly.
But that's, I think, a huge point that people don't take that in, right?
I mean,
you don't like inflation.
President Biden needs to release all of the extra supply of gasoline. Well, that's not capitalism. You know, so what you're asking for is a socialist or communist answer to the rough economic times that you have. But if we were to have true capitalism, we would have these rough economic times where people would lose their homes. And, you know, go back and study the Great Depression and what happened to people. The banks closed, right? And you lost all of the money that you had in the bank. Oh, we can't let that. So we're going to pass the Glass-Steagall Act, and we're going to pass the FDIC, and the government's going to get involved and say that they're going to protect our money up to a certain limit. Rah, 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 rah. Okay, not capitalism.
Capitalism, according to Merriam-Webster, is an economic system characterized by private or corporate ownership of capital goods, by investments that are determined by private decision, and by prices, production, and the distribution of goods that are determined mainly by competition in a free market.
Again, no mention of government involvement. Okay? So we do not have, folks, true capitalism. Do we have a form of capitalism? Yes. Do we have a form of socialism? The government's involved in production and prices.
And the equitable distribution of goods in Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, unemployment, right? I mean, all of those things are versions of a centralized control system. So they are social welfare systems. You could contend that they're not exactly socialism because they don't apply to everybody, but they're forms of it, I think, is fair to say. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, our economy is bad. It's led to the greatest economy the world has ever seen.
Exactly.
So there is a balance there to saying, and I think part of what you've been trying to get at, Lance, right, is I know because we all feel this, right? We just did an episode, you know, we've been doing a lot of Ukraine episodes, and inflation obviously is getting hit additionally because of some of that. So as the economy and the stock market are taking their hits. But we've also talked about it should be, I think, and this is what I hope people will take a few moments to think about here during our break, is how dependent our happiness has become on this. And it's not, you say, well, hasn't it always kind of been this way? Well, I don't know if it has, because as the article points out, only since about 2000 has Gallup been able to track this severe of a political belief that the party that we support determines how the economy is doing. Only since 2000. So we're talking that even when Ronald Reagan was in office, most people didn't primarily attribute the economy's success to what party they supported.
That's true.
I've lived
this.
This is a newer phenomenon.
This is a new concept. Right.
This racking of ourselves to constantly attribute, well, if Trump's in power and I like Trump, then the economy's good. Doesn't matter if it is or not. That's what I think. And if Biden's in power and I like Biden, then the economy's good, and it doesn't matter what people say. And that you need to chew on for a minute, because what a way to tie up our happiness. So what do we do about all this? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. What to do about inflation and consumer confidence in the economy? Well, if Lance or I had the single answer, then we probably should be in a different line of work.
Yeah, but I don't want all the recognition. It's too much fanfare. Yeah. So I do have the answers.
Because you don't.
I just want.
Right, you don't have that right now.
I just
You're
want to
on the radio.
I just want to lay low. Right.
Okay. Yeah, being on the radio, online media, podcasting, those are all forms of laying low, flying under the radar. So I guess the first thing I'll tackle, because I think this is, it sounds oversimplistic, but the consumer confidence, right? Choose to be happy. I don't know. Choose to believe that the economy is not as bad as you've led yourself to believe that it is. Because the economy, right? And here's the key. We say the economy, and I think we interweave that into our personal lives. And we get bogged down in this rigmarole of thinking that, the economy involves me and what I'm doing. And it's like, well, yeah, but it really doesn't. If Lance gets hit by a bus when he leaves here, the economy really doesn't care. I mean, in the grand scheme of the economy of the United States of America, nothing has really changed. I guess from that point, I do think we don't want to overly convince ourselves that each of us individually has a grand impact on the economy. So when we say the economy is doing well, it doesn't mean that individual people are doing well. And I think that's a hard thing. We've talked about that before, right? Inflation hurts. Is the economy okay? Well, I mean, generally speaking, a lot of the indicators are strong, right? I mean, in fact, interest rates going up, you could argue, is a good thing for the economy because banks and lenders are going to make better money as a result of this. Wages going up, right? And therefore the cost of goods going up. Well, we've said that wages probably need to go up. So, I mean, is that necessarily a bad thing? Unemployment's very low. We always, we were griping about unemployment for, it felt like so many years when I was growing up, that unemployment, we got to get that under control.
And more people are cooking at home instead of eating out, and they're healthier, which saves on medical bills in the future because people are eating healthier at home than buying the fast food, saturated fat stuff outside the home.
The problem though is, Lance, everything that you and I've talked about are abstract, long-term ideas. And as we've talked about before, and this isn't Lance and I not standing on high, because it'd be lying if we said that we were immune to these things, because we're all susceptible to them. What do we feel day in and day out and week in and week out? And one thing that most people feel, I don't feel it, but most people feel it, is they're driving down the road, they look over and there's the price of gas. And it's like, oh man, even if you're not getting gas today, it's like, that freaking, gas, and that's the kind of stuff, whether or not it should, right? That's the type of stuff that determines consumer confidence. I went to the store, I would have paid, $3 for a dozen eggs, and instead I paid $4, right? Or I wanted these strawberries and I had to pay $2 extra. Or whatever it might be. Or I went to this restaurant where I'd usually spend $9 for wings and I'm spending 10, again, whatever it might be. Those are the kinds of things, regardless of whether or not they're true indicators of the economy's strength. Those are the type of things that determine how we all feel about how the world's going on. And I guess what I'm challenging folks to do, Lance, on the consumer confidence side, is to think about some of those things that you and I have brought up and say, there's a bigger picture than that, right? Are you making more than you used to make, even relative to inflation? There's a good chance the answer is yes. There's a good chance that's true. Now, is it as much as you want? Maybe not. Do you have a lot of the things that you want? More Americans say, yeah, they do. But somehow we also think the economy is not going well. Well, I couldn't get that as fast as I wanted, so the economy is not good. Well, I don't know if that really means the economy is not good. It means that we have a labor shortage. It means that we have supply chain problems, none of which really dealt with the economy. The economy and what is happening to it, I think, are symptoms of we've been through a worldwide pandemic.
Well, and in their lives, other anecdotal evidence in the articles that you were mentioning, this gentleman switched careers during the pandemic and now owns his own business. And gosh, with the cost of everything, he's got to give up his family's 4 season tickets to the NHL team in their community, right? Does that mean the economy's bad just because, the economy's bad and wow, I can only drive one of my cars instead of the 3 that are sitting in the driveway. Wait a minute, you have 3 cars? I have 3 cars, so there's only 2 drivers? What? And the economy's bad. My God, I need to rail against the machine and, against Biden and Trump and whoever's in power because I can't drive all three of my cars, even though there's only two drivers in the family. Your point is well taken. And we let those kinds of things affect us. And I will just go back to what my granddad said to me one time when I was a little boy. He said, son, you're going to hear people complain all the time about paying taxes. He said, as a young man living through the Great Depression and being married to your grandmother, I will never complain about paying taxes because that means I had a job.
I had enough money that I was part of the group that gets to pay taxes.
Exactly. And I've always, when I get my tax bill, and it's tax season now for many people. And when I get my tax bill, I don't complain because I think of granddad sitting me down and talking to me. And if you have to pay taxes, that means you had a job, which means you're a whole lot better off than those people that aren't working. And to me, that just sums it up. Okay. That it's up to us, as your point is, to determine whether we look at it, the glass half full or half empty. And if you're paying taxes and you're able to put gasoline in your car and, the worst thing in your life is that you can't afford your $6 Starbucks cappuccino, you have to cut that out of your life. Is your life really that bad? Does that really mean that your economic stability is horrible? Now, on the other side, if you're getting thrown out of your home because you can't make a rent payment and you can't find a job in your town because all the businesses have closed up and moved away, okay, you have reason to be upset about the economy. Some of the rest of us who are upset about the economy, as Justin said, we maybe need to stop and take a look. And are things really as bad as what we perceive them to be in our own individual life?
So that's the address to consumer sentiment, I think, is a adjustment of our mental scape, which is what we've been talking about here, and just how we're really assessing how we're doing. The other component of that is the inflation component, right? And some of the supply chain issues. And what do we do about that? Well, I know this isn't an answer that people love, but the Fed is doing things about inflation. It takes time, right? And this is a natural, as you highlighted, Lance, this is a natural part of our economy, especially since we've had such a repressed decade or so, a little over a decade, since the financial crisis of low interest rates, availability of goods was large, so lower prices. This is a correction. And that is part of what our economy does. Now, this may have been stoked by a, international pandemic. But nevertheless, it was probably going to happen no matter what. It may have just been forced along by this, because if you take away the pandemic, we still would have had a labor shortage, which still would have led to companies having trouble getting things produced, which still would have led to prices increasing. So maybe it wouldn't be as bad. Maybe it wouldn't be as severe as it is, but it probably still would have happened.
And if there's a worker shortage, wages would have gone up, because that's the natural law of supply and demand of a capitalist economy.
And we see wages going up.
If you need workers and the pool of workers is small, then you have to offer those workers more than your competitors if you want to have enough workers to keep your business open. So that would have raised wages no matter what, the labor shortage, irregardless of the pandemic or the war in Ukraine or anything else. Just the fact that there aren't enough people to fill all the jobs that are available. And we've done that show, right? There are something like 10 million jobs that can't be filled because there aren't that many people looking for
Only
work.
Some 8 million looking for a job.
Right. So.
But yeah, I would refer people to that episode. I mean, I don't want to pass the buck, but it's like we did that show, and we did that show before inflation was going like it's going. We got to have more people to work, And yes, there's those people out there I know griping about the people that don't want to work, and that's fine. We can gripe about those people. But the reality is the people that want jobs, there are not enough of them to fill the jobs that are available.
Well, even if the people who weren't working took jobs, there still aren't enough people working. I mean, not enough people to fill all the jobs that are open. Right.
So the question there is, are we going to go through a contraction of our economy, which may be necessary? The economy will correct itself. And in this case, it will correct itself by eliminating businesses and by eliminating a plethora of different things that are available, saying, there's not enough workers. So we got to call the herd a little bit, slim down the businesses, consolidate the offerings. That's what has to take place. Or we will figure out a way to get more workers, in which case we will offset that and allow growth to continue. And that, I think, will have, it'll have a sizable impact on inflation, coupled with what the Fed is already attempting to do.
Well, I remember when my grandparents and aunts were really upset because stores started to open on Sunday. I mean, we think we can have, and online we do, but just in the box stores, and going in to the store in my lifetime, it wasn't always open on Sunday. I remember when it was a Sunday. Well, Sunday's a time for church and family, and the stores are going to be open now. That's going to ruin everything. So to your point of contraction, right? We haven't always had 24/7 access to things. And just because we do now doesn't mean we're going to continue to have that. Maybe it's an inconvenience. Okay. But again, it's part of what you're describing as a contraction.
So why did we have this conversation today, Lance? What was the goal? Are we just trying to bog people down with rigmarole, just waste their time with petulant and useless information, or are we after something else?
No, what we're after is our mission here at True Chat.
Oh.
And that is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've done it today about inflation and psychology and all of those things. And hopefully it's been an enjoyable show and you've learned something. If you don't agree with us or you do agree with us, either way, email us at podcast@thestateofus.org and tell us how you feel about these things we've talked about. Share them with your friends and family. And if they say, well, that sounds like something that I might want to listen to every once in a while, tell them they can find us as a podcast on Overcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. We're also heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the country. What do you have our final tally at today, Lance?
I didn't keep score. But I think it was close. You might have just eked it out with that last rigmarole.
I think I did.
Did you? Yeah, I know you always think you do.
Well, that's that positivity. Very, very good.
If Justin uses the word of the day once, he thinks he's got to win.
That's right.
He's positive.
Well, and the key is use it a lot in the last segment because it's that recency bias thing, right?
Exactly.
Then you think
it's what's in people's minds.
That's right. They think I won, and that's, as we discussed today, that's all that really matters. Right? It doesn't matter if I did or not.
Is the economy good or bad? Just what do you think, right? What can I do to make you think it is so you'll reelect me?
For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to Bradley Butch, our producer, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.